Hello, boys and girls of St. Lucie Public Schools. I am Miss Owens, the math coach at Longwood Elementary, and I am excited to be able to work with you guys. So thank you for tuning in with me. I hope that you guys are enjoying the lessons and that you are learning a lot about fractions. In today's lesson, we are going to work on combining fractions. We are going to use our fraction tiles as support to help us understand the sizes of these fractions and how when you join them together, you can make equal size trains. So we will be creating fraction trains in this lesson. We're going to play a game today called Pick Two. So I'll put that game name in the corner. But before we begin, I want to go over how we can combine. I just want to go over the basics of fractions. So we always start with our whole. And we know that when we're looking at the whole, it has not been broken apart. It's just one whole. When you think about whole numbers, you think about numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth and so on. Fractions are not the same as a whole number. In order to create a whole number with fractions, you'd have to put all the pieces back together, almost like a puzzle. So when we are breaking up things, we're breaking up whole numbers, the pieces that we get are fractions. Fractions are made up of pieces. What happens when you take a whole and you break it into two parts? Do you know the name of the fractions of when you break a whole into two parts? Do you know what you call that? You call it halves. And one of those parts is 1/2. What about if you take a whole and you break it into 4 parts? You get fourths. Good job. And what if I break it into 8 parts? What would I call those pieces? They would be called eighths. And what do you call the pieces if you break a whole into 16 parts? 16ths. A very important thing to remember is when you break a fraction into halves or fourths or eighths or 16ths, each one of those pieces is the same size. Fractions is a form of equal sharing because each part is the same size. Okay, so we want to review all the different ways to make a whole. If I was going to use halves to create a whole, how many halves would I need to match the size of one whole? I would need 2 halves. 2 halves is equivalent to 1 whole. Write that down. 2 halves is equivalent to 1 whole. What if I was going to use fourths? How many fourths would I need to match the size of a whole? 4 fourths. I would need all 4 of those parts, put them back together to create the whole. So 4 fourths is equivalent to 1 whole. What if I use the eighths? How many eighths are equivalent to 1 whole? 8 eighths. So that's 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8. So 8/8 is equivalent to 1. And what about your 16ths? Let's count them. 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16, 5/16, 6/16, 7/16, 8/16, 9/16, 10/16, 11/16, 12/16, 13/16, 14/16, 15/16, 16/16. That's a tongue twister. 16/16 is equivalent to 1. Okay, so we've gotten the basics underway. We're going to go ahead and get into the game called Pick 2. Now remember, in this lesson, we are learning how to combine fractions. When you think about combining numbers or fractions, combine means to join together. And when you think about adding, subtraction, division, multiplication, which of those operations involves joining together? Addition. Addition is a form of joining together or combining. So in this lesson, we will work on a little bit of adding. So the way pick 2 goes is you pick 2 fractions. What's the name of? Okay, we're gonna the whole will always be like our guiding fraction. It'll be the one that we use to measure the other fractions up to. We know when we have all of the parts, we have our whole. When we don't have all of the parts, we don't have our whole. So for right now, we're not really focusing on the whole. I'm going to pick 2 fractions. I'll pick the half, and I will pick an eighth. Now, pick 2. There are my 2 fractions. The next part of this game is to pick one size of a fraction that I can use to go across this board to create a train to match the size of my 2 fractions. So the 2 fractions that I picked to make a train with is a half and an eighth. Let's pick a single fraction, and we're only going to use that fraction to match that train. I'm going to pick the eighths. So I have to make a train of the eighths until I come all the way out here to match the train of my 2 fractions. So how many eighths do I have so far? 2 eighths. 1/8, 2 eighths. What about now? 3 eighths. Did I match this train of my 2 fractions? Not quite. So I have 3 eighths, 4 eighths, 5 eighths. With the 5 eighths, I was able to match the equivalency of my train, and I'm going to record that down. So 1/2 plus or combined with 1/8 is equivalent to 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8. 5/8. So my 2 fractions, the half and the eighth, are equivalent to 5/8 when combined. Let's pick another single fraction, and we are going to see, can we create another fraction train that is equivalent to 1/8 plus 1/2. So we're going to use the 16ths. We're going to create a train, a fraction train with the 16ths. We want to come all the way out here and match that 1/2 and 1/8. So let's go back and count our 16ths so far. 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16, 5/16, 6/16, 7/16, 8/16, 9/16, 10/16. Wow. So 1/2 plus 1/8 is equivalent to 10/16. Okay. Can we try the fourths? Let's see. 1/4, 2/4, 3. The fourths won't work because you're not going to get enough to make it equivalent to it. You'll get less than that amount or you'll get greater than, but not equivalent to. Nice try. So let's try another fraction. So we'll start our game again. And we'll pick 2 different fractions this time. Because remember, the name of the game is pick 2. You pick 2 fractions and then you use the single units of one size of a fraction. And you make a fraction train that is the same length. And then you record your equations. You record your addition equations. Okay, so speaking of recording your addition equations, if you guys turn to your workspace page 15, you can record your pick 2 you guys can record your pick 2 answers on page 15 in your workspace. I got a little tongue-tied there, guys. Okay. So now you don't need like a dice or anything to pick your 2 fractions. It's up to you. You can pick the 2 fractions that you want. I am going to pick 1/4 and 1/8. Those are my 2 fractions. 1/4 plus 1/8. Now let's pick a single unit of fractions to see how many of those units will be equivalent to 1/4 plus 1/8. Let's do the 16ths because they're so much more smaller. 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16, 5/16, 6/16. So 1/4 plus 1/8 is equivalent to 6/16. Wow. Okay, let's do eighths. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8. So 1/4 plus 1/8 is equivalent to 3/8. I don't think we're going to be able to do fourths because we already have 1/4 here and then we have an eighth, so we won't be able to get more than 1/4. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and play around with this some more. We're going to pick more numbers to work with. This game is pretty cool. It's a really unique way to add fractions and to just think of it as joining them together. You guys are doing a really good job. Keep up the excellent work. All right, so which 2 fractions would you want me to pick this time? You know what? I can add a little dice roll into this. I'll roll the dice twice, and then whichever two that I come up with, I can use those two fractions. So the first one was a 16th. And the second one is an 1/8. So I have 1/16 plus 1/8. I know we're not going to get a 4th up there. Let's try a 4th. Nope. Let's try using only 16ths. 1/16, 2/16, 3/16. So 1/16 plus 1/8 is equivalent to 3/16. You guys are doing amazing. So we're going to do this game one more time, and then we'll move into Uncover, and then you guys can continue on your own with your lessons. Let's pick a half this time. Let's pick a half and a 4th. Okay, so we're looking at 1/2 plus 1/4 is equivalent to. Let's do this lesson with 4ths. How many 4ths do you think will match the equivalency of 1/2 plus 1/4? Maybe. If you said 3/4, you were right. Now let's go back and reflect a little bit on that whole imaginary line thing that you often hear me talk about in these lessons. When you line your fraction strips up evenly, you can see that they are equivalent because this line is the same, is even from end to end. And that's what I'm usually referring to when I talk about the imaginary line, because when all of the fraction tiles are here, you have to create that line in your mind, but you need to be able to see that line going down the sides. Let's try it again with 1/8. How many 1/8 do you think we're gonna need to match 1/2 plus 1/4? Maybe so. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8. So 1/2 plus 1/4 is equivalent to 6/8. Let's try again with 16ths. How many 16ths do you think we're going to need to match the equivalency of 1/2 plus 1/4? Maybe so. Let's take a look at how many 16ths make up 1/8. 2 16ths. So if I have 6/8, about how many 16ths do you think it will take to measure out that train? Maybe so. So we have 2 16ths, 3 16ths, 4 16ths. Can you count with me? 5 16ths, 6 16ths, 7 16ths, 8 16ths, 9 16ths, 10 16ths, 11 16ths. Wow, 12 16ths. So we're going to go with our original expression here. 1/2 plus 1/4 is equivalent to 12/16. And a lot of times we talk about if a fraction is equal to this fraction, then that fraction is equal to all the other fractions that are also equal to that fraction. So let's review. If 1/2 plus 1/4 is equivalent to 3/4, and 1/2 plus 1/4 is also equivalent to 6/8, and 1/2 plus 1/4 is equivalent to 12/16, then that means the 3/4 are also equivalent to the 6/8, and they're also equivalent to the 12/16. Do you agree? Why do you agree? Use your fraction strips to help explain how you know the 3/4 and the 6/8 and the 12/16 are all equivalent to each other. Because they have the same length and size and they take up the same amount of space. Okay. When you are finished with your worksheet, you're going to complete page 15 of your lesson. You can always go back and play Uncover. I believe the rules for Uncover are on page 8. And I was going to get into a game of Uncover, but I really am enjoying playing Pick 2. So I want to play around with Pick 2 just a little more. And let's heighten it up a little bit. Remember, when in doubt, fraction strips out. Use those fraction strips to guide you. You do not have to try to figure this out on your own. So let's play around with Pick 2 a little more. And this time, we are going to combine more fractions. We're going to combine other fractions. Okay. I want to start out with... Oh, I only get to pick 2. Oi. I was about to get a whole bunch of fraction strips and put it up here. I gotta remember the rules to the game. Pick 2. So, let's do... We probably already did this one, but we're gonna change the game around a little bit. 1/2 and 1/8. 1/2 plus 1/8 equals... Okay. Let's see how many fourths. 1/4. 2/4. And I know that I cannot add another 4th. But I can add a different fraction there. Which fraction do you think would fit perfectly right here? An 1/8. So I can say 1/2 plus 1/8 is also equivalent to 1/4, 2/4, 2/4, and 1/8. Hey, that makes sense. Because the 2/4 are equivalent to the 1/2 and the 1/8 is still the same. Let's try to use other fractions. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8. So 1/2 plus 1/8 is equivalent to 5/8. Let's try it a different way. 1/4, 1/8, Whoa. I used a lot of different tiles here to match my pick 2. So I used 1/4, 1/8, and 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16. So 1/2 plus 1/8 is equivalent to 1/4 plus 1/8 plus 4/16. 4/16. Okay. Last round of pick 2. And I just want to show you guys that fraction equivalency is all about matching the fractions with other fractions that are equal in size and length. They have the same fractional value and they represent the same fractional value of the whole. So last game of pick 2. And you can find the rules, if I haven't already said so, you can find the rules for the game pick 2 on page 14 in your workspace workbook. So this time I am going to pick 1/4 and 1/16. So those are my 2 fractions. 1/4 plus 1/16. And we want to find all the fractions that are equivalent to these 2 fractions. So let's start with my 1/8. I can get 2/8 up here, but I would have to get a 16th because the only thing so far that's equivalent to a 16th is the 16th. So my first one would be 2/8 and 1/16. That's equivalent to 1/4 and 1/16. Do you know which fraction the 2/8 are equivalent to in my first train? My first fraction train? The 2/8 are equivalent to the 1/4. Right? Okay, so let's take a look at the 16ths. 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16. Now I know that I'm going to be able to add one more 16th, but just take a look at these 4/16ths. The 4/16 cover the same amount of space as the 2/8, and they cover the same amount of space as the 1/4. So I'm just going to make a note to myself that 4/16 is equivalent to 2/8, and it's equivalent to 1/4. I'm going to go ahead and add my 5/16, 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16, 5/16. So 1/4 plus 1/16 is equivalent to 5/16. Well, you guys have been fabulous as always. Make sure you guys are using your fraction strips to support you as you are combining these fractions. Don't be afraid to line them up, look at them, write it down. Any equivalent fraction connections that you make sure you're writing it down as well. Thank you guys for tuning in with me, and keep doing what you're doing, guys. I'm super proud of you. Hard work pays off. I know you guys can do it. See you next time.